much to see.
Hi everyone, and welcome to another Schrodinger's Bathtub. We were just discussing in the background how everything looks like it's going to go really good this time, and we're going to have everything working fine, and I forgot to do something before we started. But that doesn't affect you guys, it only affects Matt and I. Well, really Matt. So, I'm an idiot. And I can't fix it whilst we're in the middle of the stream, unfortunately. So yeah, that's fine. We'll figure it out. Hi. So again, hi to you all. Thank you for joining us. I hope you got your questions ready. I would imagine it's not going to be too hard to get me all confused, but Matt's pretty good on this, so we should be all right. Throw all the pressure on Matt.
I know. I'm just educated beyond my intelligence. I am sure you will quite easily find areas that are not my expertise. If it's spectroscopy based, I think I should be good, but if you want to be humbled by other people's intelligence, do physics.
Yeah. So, and of course, with co-hosting with me as always is the wonderful Matt, almost a doctor, and who there in the chat hasn't watched Matt's absolutely amazing video that he put out today about alien life in the possible alien life in the solar system. Part 1. It's brilliant. Go watch it. Matt's links to his channels in the description. Don't go watch it now. Wait till we're done. But if you have questions about that, feel free. We will reserve the right to not answer questions about anything that could be in part 2, because you can just wait till part 2. And we are planning on doing another sort of semi-question answer, but more about the Matt show after the second part comes out. And we're hoping that we'll be able to have Tessa on, and maybe Kitty and Randolph as well, so you can talk to the people, all the people who are involved with Matt making this absolutely amazing video. So,
and don't forget that Jen also had a good part to do with this video. So when she says it's amazing, it's kind of a bit of self-praise, but deservedly
not
so.
Really. Yeah, I mean, you don't need to watch it to really enjoy the content. So, and my participation was helping Matt get his animations in, so yeah, it's all Matt.
You also sent me a good few pieces of reading material that I did use, particularly the Mercury one.
For you.
Yes, so you had a big part in it. It wouldn't have occurred as it did if it wasn't for you. But
yeah.
We ready for questions, or
I don't know.
Are we going to procrastinate a bit longer?
I think what I might do is I do have a way I can fix this, but to fix this, I'm going to have to turn your image off for a minute, Matt, and then so no one will see Matt for a second, and then I can fix this, and then Matt can see the questions, because at the moment, if I put the questions up, Matt can't read them, which would be right if this wasn't meant to be question and answer. So I will turn Matt off. They can still hear you though, and
oh, good. And then because I'm also watching on the side here, the YouTube one. There'll be about 10 seconds.
Oh look, I still messed it up. Aren't I clever? They can just put up with me messing this up.
And whilst Jen is there trying to fix the numerous technical problems that are a necessity for any live stream, might want to be warming up our questions and thinking what area we're going. I wonder what topics we're going to hit tonight. I wonder if it'll be physics-based or chemistry, or you'll try and curveball us with some biology. I wonder. And yes, I'm not going to be as loud because it is quite late here. And I think I'm still gone, aren't I?
You are, but I haven't turned you back on yet.
Oh, okay, good. As long as people can hear me.
Yeah, they can definitely hear you. Let's turn Matt back on, and there he is. Yay!
Yay! I can also now see the questions, which would be good.
Brilliant.
Although I've been told I have a face for radio, so people can't see me, I guess. That's...
Okay, so Gary Priestley said, science question, why question science? Which also, no, he's trying to be funny. We should always question things. Even in science, that's part of the scientific process, is that we question it. That's what peer review is about. We question the discoveries that people make. So, yes, we should always be questioning science. If we stop questioning it, then we're not challenging ourselves, and we're not making... The scientific method breaks down because we're not making sure that the things that we discover are accurate.
Yes,
wanna
I mean,
answer that?
science works by basically questioning itself.
Yes, it does. That's how the
So-
scientific method works.
Because it's always, okay, is this wrong? Is that wrong? How do we know that's right? And so on and so forth. So
Yeah.
we'll get there, but we'll keep going. Yes, so are we just going to open it up and see whoever wants to ask whatever? Or
Gary's going to steal your educated beyond my intelligence.
well, I stole
Matt
that from
stole it,
somewhere else, so I just like it. It's so fitting. Although I stole it from a meme that had
Ted wants
opossums
to
in
know
it.
if you're an alien.
Shh, Ted, you're not meant to ask that.
He's going to take control of us with his science education videos.
No, my laser sharks. Oh, damn it, I said it aloud.
Okay, so Ted's it's not really a question, it's more a statement. Michio Kaku, and I know I've butchered his name there. Says all science could be wrong, and that's the whole. That's all part of it. It's that element that science has to be falsifiable, or the possibility of being falsified. That doesn't mean everything can be falsified, but there has to be the possibility that it could be. If you're going to state something that it has to be fact and it's not challengeable, then it's not falsifiable, and then it's not science.
Yes.
It's something else.
So it all could be wrong, but it's unlikely to be wrong.
Yeah. So throw us your questions. If you want some answers to something, if you want to ask Matt questions about his degree and what he does and things, that's awesome. If you want to try and play it like we used to do when I did Stump Jen, where you throw questions where you want to see if we can't answer them, go for it. We're all up for that. But we reserve the right in this one to look things up if we have to.
I mean, look, you can ask any questions. There we go. Done. Yeah. Ask whatever you want.
Ted said,
although I think the chat is still greeting. They're all greeting themselves. So I wonder who who
Ted has said, which means I love
there.
being wrong, and I'm the same. Ted, being wrong is awesome because I learned something.
Gary has asked a question. First one.
Can we explain axioms?
So,
go for it.
Jen, you can have that one because my answer is no.
Dear. I actually don't want to explain this because I will balls it up. Quite frankly. Generally, axioms are currently held ideas that we have in science. So things that we put up there with laws and that, but they're axioms of truth within science or with anything. Actually, that's what an axiom is. It's up there with laws and things like that. So we hold to that this thing should be true because evidentially it appears to be, but that doesn't mean it can't be wrong. It just appears to be in that vein of things.
So I have Googled it because that's what you do when you don't know something.
Yes,
apparently.
and whilst Jen blathers.
It's a self-evident assumption common to many branches of science.
Yeah.
So there we go.
Which is pretty much what I was saying.
Yes. Also, I did notice another really good question there, the second one from James. What is the average airspeed velocity of an unladen swallow? African or European?
I should just let you answer
it. Well, no, we had the same answer, so...
Okay, Donald asked, what will we do for leather once cows stop being slaughtered?
Synthetics.
Yeah, we already have synthetic leather.
Yeah, it's like faux leather, FAUX, the French version.
However, we do have
false.
issues with that because a lot of that comes from oil, petrochemical residues and things like that. So they're almost like a kind of plastic. So as we should be stopping using those things too, we may end up having to manufacture our own chains from other organic matters that are reusable, regrowable, like sugarcane or something like that. I'm not sure exactly what long chain molecules we'd need to create pleather and things like that, but
Could also possibly train bacteria
to grow
to make some of those chemicals, because we already do that with plastics. There's some plastics where you train the bacteria to make it, or we have
we
bacteria
can genetically modify them
under the right
too.
Still be a little way off.
Examples was spider silk proteins being chemical. Spider silk. The genetic makeup in spiders that creates with a strong spider silk proteins was spliced into goats so that they could harvest the silk proteins from the goat's milk, so we could actually manufacture large amounts of spider silk. So
yeah, because that's one of the big problems with spider silk, is that they're really difficult to farm because they're quite high up in the insect food chain. It's not easy to keep them. And the other solution to that was also possibly silkworms, modifying silkworms. So instead of producing their regular silk, they'll produce spider silk.
Yeah. Now Ted's
basically.
Sorry, Matt.
No, I'm finished. All yours.
I was going to say, Ted's trying to get us here. What is a physics tolerance?
It's how much physics you can tolerate before you feel too dumb and want to stop.
Yeah.
Somehow I haven't reached mine.
Okay, so Harmonic Man said, being wrong isn't necessarily good, though. It depends on whoever has an agenda in the argument, also the caliber of it. Yeah, that's if you're having an argument with somebody, but in science, generally speaking, being wrong is just a way to further your education. So it's in that sense, it's not about... it shouldn't be about egos. Science should never be about egos. It is, because there are always egos involved, because humans have egos, but it shouldn't be about egos.
Yeah, but when you say you can always be wrong, it's not necessarily the fact that you are wrong, it's that you're open to being wrong, so you question and keep trying to improve your understanding. Yes, we want to hold to, or at least find out as many true things as we can, have the best understanding of how the world works around us. But yes, we have to also entertain the possibility that we're not always going to be correct, because
one of those moments where I want to quote Matt Dillahunty, even though I'm not a huge fan of Matt Dillahunty, but the thing of wanting to know more true things than false things.
Yes, as many true things
I'm
as few false
him
things.
Because I can't remember exactly how he says it, but
pretty sure that's how he does, as many true things as few false things.
Well.
And I would agree with that.
Yeah.
I normally wouldn't go to him for philosophy, but
that's a good
that part I would agree with. I think most people would too.
All right.
And I imagine people on both sides of the debate would probably agree with that, but probably not always coming to the same.
This is one of your mates, isn't it?
I don't know. I don't recognize the name, but it could be.
How is a raven like a raven?
Are we going to find out the answer soon?
I'm assuming they'll tell us because it's obviously a joke. So, and I have no idea.
No. I have no idea myself. Either. Oh well.
Where did we get to? And hi, Belinda, by the way.
Yes, we have quite a few people joining.
Ted asked if we see the meme for the goat webs. Yes, but it was a while ago, Ted, because they've been doing the goat spider silk thing for a while.
It was like, have you seen the photos of all the spiders that were given different drugs?
Yeah.
The result.
Oh, the webs they spin when they're high, or cannot.
Basically,
spin.
but yes, and like I saw one that had 4. It had like amphetamines and THC, so marijuana, basically caffeine, and what was the last one? It was another pretty strong drug like LSD, and the one that made the web the worst was the caffeine.
Yeah.
It had all these high strength narcotics, and the caffeine did a better job. Oh well.
The one on Speed was hilarious though, because it just kept going around the outside bit. It never moved in to do the inner strands. It just went round and round and round.
Go around. I was actually, before this, I was watching a video on Nazi Germany and their use of speed leading up to and then in World War II. And for a while, they were the world's biggest producer of what would now be illicit drugs. You used to be able to buy speed over the counter. And by speed, I mean actually methamphetamine.
Wow. But then again, a lot of drugs were used to be over the counter. I mean, opium dens were everywhere, and it wasn't illegal. People went in and had their opium fix and melted their brains, basically. Tubin, nope, never met him. Just having a little fun. Something about, hey, both have feathers because of the old feather pens. So yeah.
Oh, what's that? I haven't seen a feather pen in a while. I don't know if I'd do any good with one, but nice quill to.
Where's Nerdy when we need him? He's always got interesting questions.
Also, if people just want to ask questions they just want answers to about science, go for it.
And it could be about anything. I mean, this is a Q&A stream. If you want to ask us questions, go for it. If they're too if they border on offensive, we might just say rephrase or whatever. But yeah, pretty much.
I like Harmonica's comment.
You know, 10 out of 9 people can't count.
No, I didn't.
And Ted asked if we gave them DMA, would the webs be blue? No, but they might.
Am I missing something?
I'm blue, but it. Sorry. Yeah. Bad people. Jeez. I've had one of those weeks where I haven't read as much as what I've wanted to, so I'm not up to date with the latest stuff that's happened in the last week. So if they start asking questions about that, I'm a bit stumped. Anything new that's come out?
There you go, quickly, ask questions. It's a bit hard because I've been.
Here's a good one.
What will we do when we run out of nuclear dump sites?
Yeah,
is a good question.
And it's one
My
of those
first
where
one
I
is
think people misunderstand how much there is with modern reactors, because the nuclear waste created by a modern reactor, not some of the older ones, but most of the modern ones, is actually quite small. Like, you could fit all of the nuclear waste that we currently have in the world, in the Western world, in one football field. Stacked up, obviously, a couple of layers.
They are incredibly efficient.
They are incredibly efficient. We don't create a lot of it. So the chances of us running out of sites isn't necessarily the problem. There's lots of places we can dump it that's out of the way. The cost of it is the problem. So
yes, and doing it safely.
Because you need a dump site that's out of its way, that it's in a geologically stable location, and you have to man it to stop terrorists or somebody like that getting in there and getting hold of the nuclear waste and making dirty bombs. It becomes expensive because these places are out of the way, like Cheyenne Mountain and things like that. Although I don't think Cheyenne Mountain's actually a storage site, but there are places similar to that in the US where they just store. And you have to have staff there. You have to have security there. So it costs a lot of money to store this for a long time. A much better idea, if we can ever get cheaper launch costs for rockets and we end up with a moon base, is we build a storage facility on the moon. Because then you're in complete control of who gets access to it. For
the meantime,
yeah,
send it into Jupiter or something. We're not going to see it again.
Yeah.
I mean, some people have spoken about sending it into the sun, but that's not as easy as it sounds because a lot of it will actually get blasted back into space.
Yeah, it's
expensive
it's actually
to get
very,
things there.
very, very difficult to fire stuff into the sun.
Yes, it gets the sunlight.
Yeah, it'll generally get destroyed before it gets there, and then it'll end up in orbit, and yet get thrown outwards with solar flares and things like that. So getting stuff into the sun is not a great plan. And a lot of the stuff that we try to send to the sun actually just automatically ends up in orbit. So that's not a great solution either. Because the energy requirements to get stuff in orbit around the sun are similar to the energy requirements we had for getting things out of the solar system. And we know how hard that's been. So
you need a lot of power.
You need a lot of power to do it. Whereas, comparably, praying stuff into Jupiter is a lot easier.
And also, we're not going to live on Jupiter, so we should be fine.
Yeah, and we're hardly going to contaminate it with. Even if we sent all the nuclear waste we currently have into Jupiter's atmosphere, compared to the actual radiation Jupiter has itself, we're hardly contaminating it at all. Because that's something people don't realize, that Jupiter itself gives off quite a bit of radiation in and of itself, especially due to its magnetic field, which is incredibly intense. In fact, it's the largest structure in the entire solar system. The magnetic field of Jupiter. It actually stretches further than the sun's.
It's also by mass twice as big as the rest of the planets in the solar system combined. Yeah.
It is enormous. Jupiter is enormous.
Very big.
We've sidetracked and I've lost track of who's entered.
Hello to everybody in the chat. Welcome. In case we've missed you.
So Sandy asked about... it's that time of year again, James, but I won't ask about leaves changing colour again. We covered it last year. Well, for Matt and I, the leaves aren't changing colour at the moment. Because it's spring.
Growing back.
They're growing back. But I get what you mean about it being autumn over there. It's basically an evolutionary survival function for the tree. By shedding its leaves, which aren't going to be incredibly functional during an intense winter, it's actually saving energy. And the leaves turning orange and falling off is basically because the tree is cutting off nutrients to those leaves. So it's
and why do some people permanently keep their heads?
Yeah, you're right. There are certainly some people who I wouldn't mind if they cut the nutrients off to their own brains.
They're not doing anything anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
I can't see all the questions. I can see one of Ted's.
He works on
regular conditioning. Although it is really buffy at the moment. If I run my hands the other way, it's just going to go... It's because of the low resolution of my camera, Ted.
Yeah.
It needs a haircut, but we can't go and get haircuts yet. On the 11th, we'll be able to. Then I'll go get a haircut.
You look alright anyway, Matt.
So, low resolution my camera.
Alright, so can Jesus turn salts of water into wine spritzers?
I hope so.
Because even if you believed he was around, he's dead now. Could he?
Not likely.
Entirely different question. No, he couldn't because I hadn't been invented then. I win.
Can't argue with that.
Can't argue with that.
I think Godless Scummer has a question that'll be more for you.
Does he?
Sorry, I can't see all of them in the chat.
I'm keeping track of where we're at.
Okay. Keep going.
What's in the stuff you pour in your radiator to clog leaks?
Oh.
I
didn't even know you had stuff, did I?
That'd be like a chemi-weld sort of thing.
My guess is that it'd be a non-Newtonian fluid. So basically a non-Newtonian fluid is a fluid that doesn't flow at basically the same rates depending on the circumstance. So if you leave it alone, it'll be incredibly, it depends because it can go either way. A good example is actually corn flour, making cornstarch solutions. If you put it into water, enough of it, you end up with a kind of like a slimy, gloopy liquid that you can push your hands through fairly easily. But if you take a hammer and whack it, and you put a lot of force, it doesn't scale. So even though I can push my hand through it, if I ramp the force up, it doesn't get faster. In fact, because the chains on the molecule start locking in each other, they don't push. So if I hit it hard with the hammer, it acts as a solid object.
Yeah. So
in fact, I don't have it on me.
Linda's further question to that is why doesn't it clog the other radiator holes and things like that? It's a pressure thing, as Matt said. Your little tiny radiator hole that squirts out the water has a lot more pressure to it than the actual water that's flowing internally within the radiator. But because your pressure increases as your diameter of the hole that it's moving through decreases.
It's actually, my guess is it'd be similar to the resin used in the Fisher space pens, if you want to look them up, because I own one of them, although it's not within reach.
Yeah, they're designed so you
bag.
can ride in any angle, and they will always.
Yes, but also they're meant to be. They're not meant to leak, and one of the reasons they do is their ink is mixed with the resin to make it a non-Newtonian fluid.
Yeah,
and at rest, the fluid doesn't flow very well. If you just leave it in the container, even under a bit of pressure. So you actually have to push down on the pen, which, given the ballpoint of the pen and how small that area is, you don't actually need much force. But when you go to write, it starts flowing. So it's not going to leak if you leave it on its own. I think it may be something similar, that while you're in the radiator and everything's moving and there's kind of forces in that, you're fine. But as soon as you hit a hole and it starts getting out, the outside layer now doesn't have much pushing on it, so it slows down. That's what's in my mind, but I haven't looked into this. It's just my guess based on the fluids I have come across.
Gary Presley asks, are we both willing to discuss our educational qualifications?
I'm happy to.
Both have at various times already, but
I'm pretty sure I've said it on streams before. And I won't go too much into some details because, I like to forget that I have a finance major. Oh, wait. Whoops. Yes, I have three. I have three majors.
Yeah. I have a major and an advanced certificate, but basically what would account for an advanced certificate? My degree is in computer science, and my secondary was maths. So, but I never got a degree in it. I should go back and finish it. That's what I should do. But the maths was done as part of doing my computer science, and I just did a bit extra. That was all because I love maths. So that's my stuff, maths and computer science. What the godless engineer would call computer engineering. Basically the same thing. In fact, actually, they call it software engineering as a degree, which I think is ridiculous because I don't look on it as engineering. Although I suppose you are making, I don't know. It doesn't feel like engineering to me.
Most engineers, though, like most people I've spoken to who know about it, do consider software engineers to be separate from most engineers. But now that I'm thinking of degrees, I realise that I've got both my certificates up there. So, because I did a double degree, that's why I have two. And I haven't obviously graduated from my current degree, otherwise it wouldn't be almost a doctor. Although I'm tempted to keep that name. That'll be a kind of open question if I do eventually get to the end of everything, and it'll be, what do I call the channel? But on that, so I did a double degree. I did Bachelor of Commerce, Bachelor of Science, and in the science I did a double major. I did both chemistry, advanced chemistry, and advanced physics, and they were both difficult. The physics was probably harder academically, and the physics was also the only subject I consistently had all-nighters for. Because
and still do.
They would give you but at least with the PhD it's more spread out. It's not generally one night of pain, whereas with those assignments it wasn't that I wasn't a generally disorganized student. It was fine. It was just that these assignments they gave you in physics were too hard to do on your own, because if they made it fair that everyone could do them on their own, they were too easy and everyone got full marks. So they made them because they knew everyone would collaborate, so they just made them insanely difficult.
Yeah.
So you'd end up... So it was like one evening I went to the library with mates and we're like, all right, let's just stay here until it's finished. It can't be that bad. There's 6 of us. It's only worth 5%. How bad can it be? So I start 4 in the afternoon and we're still there at like 3 in the morning.
So I've heard from people who've done quantum physics. It's like Yeah, it never stops.
Yep, that was some of it. Quantum and statistical mechanics were the worst. Like, they were the most difficult for assignments.
Any
Stat
subject
mech mainly
which starts
just...
with statistical. It's like...
Hey, my only HD commerce subject was in econometrics, which is basically stats in economics. So it doesn't start with it, but they kind of assumed a much lower level of maths than the physics did, which helped.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's my background.
Ted's
so
asking us silly questions again.
Of course, we need silly questions. Oh yes, that was that guy, the apologist, who was talking about how, because it's in the book that Muhammad split the moon, and I think while most people, at least most Western Muslims, seem to take that as more of a metaphor rather than a literal, like he broke the moon in half. This guy thinks it was real, and he points to lines that cover the planet that look like it might have, like that go down the middle of it. Oh, not planet, but the moon. Except he showed one of Saturn or Jupiter's moons instead of our actual moon. Yeah. So yes, talk about misinformation or being wrong. He is wrong by. Here we go.
So, most important question relating to space travel this way: Babylon 5 remake, yeah or nay? Considering J. Michael Straczynski is actually doing it, it should be good. Having said that, I don't know why he didn't just do a Star Wars and set it slightly further in the history of his universe and refer back to old characters and stuff like that and just continue it going, because that would probably serve the fandom better than remaking. But I know that he had ideas that he wanted to do differently from the way he originally made it. And part of that was that they gave him extra seasons and then they took extra stuff away from him, especially when it came to doing the Crusades, which a lot of people don't like. But I actually enjoyed Crusades. So I wouldn't mind seeing some of the ways he would change some of that, especially when it comes to the Technomancers, because they were awesome. So
I have not seen it. So
Technomancers are people who use a very advanced science to simulate magic.
Ooh, that's a cool premise.
They're really cool.
Because I think that's the closest you'll ever get to kind of supernatural abilities humans have. So I like that. That's pretty cool.
Okay, so Donald asked, can we work on nuclear waste being neutralized? Thoughts?
We can work on it, but I don't think we'll ever get there, because so when a lot of these fission materials, because we're not talking about fusion here, because that doesn't leave radioactive waste, but we haven't got it working yet, though we are getting closer every day. So hopefully that'll be where things go, and we don't need to worry about a lot of the other methods for too long. But of course, let's say we do. The fission materials don't decay in one go.
No.
So when you have uranium, if you leave it on its own, so uranium-238 is heavier, so because it's got more neutrons, they act like glue, it's more stable. The one they tend to use for the nuclear reactions is uranium-235. It's a bit lighter, less neutrons, so it's not as stable. What the reaction that goes in a nuclear reactor is a bit different to if you left it on the bench. If you left it on the bench, it would just slowly decay in a series of steps. Relatively slowly, still fast enough to do you damage if you're too close to it. It'll decay in a series of steps, slowly getting lighter as bits come off and it breaks. In a nuclear reactor, however, what you do is you slam a neutron into it at the right speed, not too fast, not too slow. It's like Goldilocks, and it rips again apart into smaller particles. And I think there's a couple of different ways it can go. So I'm not a nuclear physicist, but I remember looking up this a little bit for my video on Chernobyl.
Yeah.
Which I'm also happy to answer questions on.
The more advanced breeder reactors that we have, they're being developed, but we actually don't have any of, because nuclear scares in the US basically they shut down the experimental reactor they were working on. Basically feed back the nuclear waste through the reactor, and that actually helps to split down more, so that some of the really, really bad isotopes you get out of the reaction are actually broken down. So you end up with stuff that you still have to store, but you don't end up with like the cadmium and things like that, which can be really dangerous. So
yeah, well, this was getting to, because it kind of breaks down in steps. Once you start getting lighter, generally speaking, the half-lives increase, and you get to a point where they decay too slowly to be useful to get energy out of them.
yeah.
So I think the problem is that we won't be able to perfectly neutralize it, because we just
But on
we
the
could
other
probably
side of that, if
burn
you
some
can
of it off.
Yeah, if you breed it down, if you burn it off enough that you're down to, say, radioactive iron, the rate of the rate of emission for radioactive iron, it isn't enough that it would probably kill you if you got exposed. Whereas expose you to something like cadmium, that's radioactive cadmium, you're dead, pretty much.
Or polonium.
Or polonium, yeah. So these are the ones that
in
you
your
feed
tea.
back into the yeah, polonium in your tea. But these are the ones
They've done that, though.
Yes, they have. These are the ones that if you put back through the breeder reactors, you can reduce the amount that there is. So there is some aspect of it, but you can never fully neutralize it, because it's the nature of nuclear waste. It takes time. There's a limit to what we can do, and the rest of it just takes time, and a bloody long time. But
I think
again,
uranium-238's got like a half-life of, what, 5 billion years?
Yeah, something like that.
Which is why we use it to date the solar system and the Earth.
Having said that, with a life of that length, if by the time that we get to being able to do fusion, and we've got fusion powered rockets and things like that, we launch the remaining nuclear waste we've got into Jupiter, it's going to be such a small amount of radiation that we're adding to Jupiter that will be basically negligible. It can decay in the middle of Jupiter for the next 5 billion years until our sun goes poof. And yeah, no problem, because there's way more radiation from the sun ending than we would ever create in our lifetimes.
Yes. Although the other thing to keep in mind is that eventually the sun will get too active for us to stay here.
Yes.
So by that time, it won't matter. We won't be able to fill Jupiter up. But on that note, I do know that the Earth's core is still warm because of the nuclear decay we have.
Yeah, because it lasts for a long time.
Because the planet should have cooled off a long time ago without it.
Yeah. Well, that, and probably the fact that we've got such a large local moon that helps with. There'll be a small amount of tidal warming between the moon and the sun because of our orbit shifts just enough.
Isn't the moon still meant to have a molten or semi-molten core?
Slightly. So it goes both ways, because the Earth creates tides on the moon too, but they're tides in the rock, basically. So at the core of the moon, you've got a bit of tidal heating, so you would have a little bit of molten in the core of the moon. Not enough that it could ever get through to the surface, not without something big praying into the moon, and that would actually create more molten lava than probably would come up from the center. But yes. So
that's what happened to Ceres.
Still has a really, really tiny magnetic field. So there you go.
Yeah.
So where did we get to? Question for Matt: why does UV make stuff white?
It photo bleaches them, basically. So we see color because when we see color from dyes and things, I'm trying to think what I've got that's colored. That here we go. It's not going to show up brilliantly my green screen because its face will disappear, but it's my little pelican, you know.
It looks great in green.
I can't do it too loud. That guy. I can't be too loud because
I realize none of them can see it in
here.
green, but I could, so it looks great.
Yeah, because if I show it to whoever on his face,
it's got a gap.
But the color here, we're seeing orange because that's the wavelength that isn't absorbed. What we see is the opposite of what's absorbed. So if I hold something up blue, like my drink bottle, that's because the red lights, basically the red end of the spectrum is disappearing. So colored compounds tend to, and particularly organic ones, that tend to absorb in the visible are at least somewhat sensitive to being broken down with enough energy. So if you bombard them by UV light, it does depend on the chemical, but This is stuff I've had to be very careful with, particularly for my honours thesis, because I used things that would photo bleach under the lasers that we were using, and they weren't particularly powerful lasers, but they were way more powerful than what anyone would have in their home. But they weren't easy to move around. They were giant benchtop things.
I'm going to ask
but
you...
not the ones that...
I'm going to ask you a question, Matt, when you're done. Because you've just reminded me of something. And this was something that I'd read about... I've read about in the last couple of weeks. And when I read it, I went, oh yeah, that makes sense. I don't know why I hadn't thought of that before. But you'll be better at explaining it than me. We have...
Maybe, we'll see.
We have very warm, bright blue stars. And we have slightly cooler, but still big, enormous red stars. Or the tinier red stars, like red dwarfs. Why don't we have any green stars, Matt?
We do. They just don't appear green. Like our sun, the highest photon count from our sun is in the green part of the spectrum, but at that balance of energies to our eyes, it doesn't appear green. I have a video on it. It's only a couple minutes long.
And
they just don't look green.
And it's got to do with the way that the spectrum works, because you've got red at one side and blue on the other and green's in the middle. And stars emit all wavelengths of light, and blue stars are blue because they're shifted towards the blue, and red stars are red because they're shifted towards the red, and green stars are in the middle, so they have all of them, and the reds and blues kind of cancel each other, balance it all out, and you end up with a white star instead of a green one.
In the case for us, if you stare at the sun or look at the sun, and please don't do that.
Yeah.
Please don't. PSA, don't stare at the sun. But if you do, it'll appear white because it's going to basically bleach out all your or like overwhelm all your color receptors.
Yeah. But
so we've got our trichromatic.
It more or less is white. It's slightly, technically, our sun is slightly green. It's very, very slightly.
I guess it depends on definitions of what counts, but yes, it is. Yeah, you can check my video. I did do a video on it. Although I just want to quickly finish something on TED. It's one, just in case I didn't make it clear, but basically what happens is it just destroys, so those chemicals end up absorbing the UV light. It contains a lot of energy and it basically breaks them down.
Yeah.
Photo bleaches them. So you end up removing the things that made the color in the first place. Again, it depends on what chemicals you're looking at, but particularly organic things are good for that. So yes, if you're like, oh look, I got good fluorescence, and then you keep bombarding it with UV, and then the color goes, you're like, oh, oops, I burnt it.
I love the fact that some of these people are trying to ask us ridiculous questions, but we're answering them all seriously. I'm not sure if we can do that with this one. Love you, nerdy.
42.
42, yeah.
42.
That's the answer to that one. Let's see.
If you did turn the universe inside out, I believe you might even get white holes. If you start reversing some of the vectors. Yeah, so
that'll have to be bleeped out.
But yes, you can actually, while I remember it, make black holes using light.
Yes, you can.
Yeah, because of E equals mc squared, energy and mass have an equivalence. So because photons are packets of energy, they have a mass equivalence, even though photon has no rest mass. So basically, if it was standing still, it would have no mass. Because it's moving and has energy, it weighs something. So if you put enough light intensity in one spot, you can actually reach critical mass and start a black hole.
In fact, a certain doctor who you know very well, and who I have actually been on streams with, well, so have you, actually did an experiment trying to make not a black hole, but trying to control gravity with light.
It's called a Kugelblitz.
Yep.
If you can get to a black hole.
Yeah.
But yeah, it would be.
But his experiment would say, could we use light, because gravity bends light? Could we use light to control gravity?
it's a cool concept, but I think the amount of energy you'd need is just not worth
Well,
it.
the real problem
Because
was
you also
that
have
the concept for what they were doing. It was the problem with the whole apparatus shake so much there was no way you could get a valid reading of it to know if you'd actually achieved what you wanted to do.
the world's most powerful laser is the one for the nuclear fusion research, where basically you use photon pressure. So because they have a mass, you can actually push things with light, and they push pellets together so much that it fuses hydrogen into helium. And yes, the NIF, National Ignition Facility over in the US, and they cannot make the beam narrower, because if they do, it ionizes the atmosphere. It basically rips the electrons off the nuclei of atoms in the atmosphere. So
And Jeff's corrected me, it's Techno Mage, which is no less awesome. But yeah, yes, he's right. It is the Techno Mage. The other term, which I've forgotten what I even said now, comes from a book, which I can't remember what it was called either. I think it might have been a Heimlin book, actually. But it's all right. Jeannie asks, is time travel ever going to be possible? Well, it already is.
not backwards.
As far as we know, there's no mechanism that could allow us to travel backwards in time. However, one of the things that we think about time, especially when we're looking at it from the quantum level, is that movement through time should be symmetric. So if you could move backwards in time, the time should flow similarly in each direction, and that's why we think there'd be causality issues if you could go back in time. However, having said that, we already know there's at least one particle that's broken in time symmetry. And I read the paper on this about 8 months ago, and I can't remember a single thing about it apart from that. But there is a particular particle that we already know is broken in time symmetry. So if things are broken with time symmetry, perhaps it's possible. But if you did, you'd be looking at like parallel universe sort of things. You'd go back in time, but you'd end up in a different timeline than the timeline you're currently in. And then you get into a whole heap of stuff that is fringe science, because it's nothing that we can prove at the moment. It's all conjecture. And
The cool thing is that going forward, you can fairly easily, relatively speaking, compared to even looking at going backwards, you can manipulate the flow of time using gravity or velocity, or some combination. So the basic concept for Einstein's relativity is that if you're in an inertial frame of reference, you should not be able to tell if you're moving without reference to an outside point. So the thought experiment, the famous one he uses, which explains it quite well, is imagine you're on a fast-moving train, because remember, we're talking pre-World War II era here. Imagine you're on a fast-moving train. If I block the windows out, and let's assume this is a perfect train with amazing suspension so it doesn't shake. If you're not accelerating, you shouldn't be able to tell whether you're moving or whether you're stationary. So let's now say that this train is getting very close to the speed of light, and you hold a mirror up in front of you. Should you be able to see yourself? In fact, I think the original one used moving at the speed of light, but we now know that if you have any mass, you can't do that. But anyway, we can even keep with that. If you're moving at the speed of light, you hold the mirror up to your face. Should you see yourself? The answer is still yes. Because even though you're moving as fast as the light, it should be going there and back, that would break relativity. So the whole concept is, well, if the light needs to go there and come back, that means mass, length, and time cannot stay the same. And when you bring acceleration into it and get into general relativity, things go really, really crazy. You can't tell the difference between a gravitational field and if you're in a box accelerating.
Yeah.
It's weird. It means like colors change for lasers if you shoot them upwards for a gravitational field, and we've done that experiment, so we know that works.
Yeah. This is the weird thing. Everything that we think we know about the universe from our common sense, the universe is actually counterintuitive. It isn't. Our
Yes.
intuitions weren't designed to deal with the reality of how the universe works. They were designed so we could run away from lions.
Yes. And you have to move quite fast for this, but the
You have to
other
move
the
quite
good
fast to
example
run away
for
from a
this one,
lion.
but so much more faster to actually reach any relativistic speeds. A lion is not reaching 10%
No,
the speed of light, which is apparently what you kind of need to get to before you
really
notice
need
any
to
of
be
these
even
effects.
a little bit faster than that, really, because I mean the relative.
Yeah, it depends how sensitive you are.
10% is not huge.
Is 1% difference. Give or take. Well, it's because it's v squared on c squared, or 1 minus v squared, and there's the square root generally. So it depends, but that's special relativity. Don't ask me general relativity. That's more
Relativity
difficult.
and general. Well, also general relativity gives us this absolutely beautiful thing about traveling through space. Even if we can never travel faster than the speed of light, there are ways with general relativity we can travel across the entire universe and explore the entire universe in our own personal lifetimes. The problem is the people you'd left behind would be dead and gone by the time you got to where you were going. Because whilst you're traveling at those speeds approaching the speed of light, time slows down for you relative to the rest of the universe. So you can get there. You'll survive. You'll be fine. It's just the same amount of time would have passed as if you'd traveled it slower for everybody outside of your little fast-moving object.
And there's I know it's just relativity. I really suggest learning because it is a really good way of showing how intuition does not work on the big or small scale, particularly big.
All right.
Yeah, like falling into a black hole. You can just watch the universe go past
we were
really,
catching up, by the way,
really
but
quickly.
we've fallen behind again because we got sidetracked on something bad. No, both like.
Damn it! All right, let's move on.
So, nerdy's being nerdy again. Does the universe always stay the same way up?
What way is up in space? Depends how you define up.
Yeah, because there is no up in space. Up to us is the opposite direction to which we experience gravity. If you're not experiencing gravity, there isn't an up.
And normally when people show depictions of Earth or our solar system, we tend to depict Earth with the North Pole facing up. But I reckon if civilization, or the majority of developed civilization that had science had developed in the Southern Hemisphere, it'd be the other way around.
Yeah,
well, there's a good chance of it.
We look at Jupiter and we go, yeah, the spot's always at the bottom. But even if you flew out to Jupiter and you tried to keep yourself on the same plane as the Earth, that's not necessarily true. Because I've done it in a simulation and it's not. It's the other way around. We just like to turn it up that way because it looks better having the spot on the bottom than on the top.
I know, maybe people will get to see that in part 2. Maybe.
We got used to
Wink,
seeing
wink,
it that
nudge,
way
nudge.
because people looked... The first images that Galileo drew of Jupiter were in a telescope. And of course you end up with image flipping. Depending on how you've designed your telescope, so... And
Depends
it
how many
also
lenses you
depends
have.
on what part of the hemisphere you're... What hemisphere you're on. Just like
Yes.
with the moon. So there is a particular way that... So like for Matt and I, in the Southern Hemisphere, we see depictions of the moon that are done in the Northern Hemisphere or when there are movies, and the moon looks wrong. Because it's upside down. So there is no set up or down. Down is the direction that gravity pulls, and up is away from gravity. That's it. So, done. So should we block God particles? We can measure them, as we do, but what good are they?
I believe they give things mass. Do they not? I'm not a particle physicist, by the way, if anyone couldn't tell already.
No. Sorry.
And we
The
couldn't block
Higgs,
them, I don't think. They're too
the Higgs
fundamental.
boson doesn't give us mass. Well, it gives a little bit of mass to the subatomic particles. However, most of the mass of the atom comes from its energy, because E equals mc squared. So the energy,
Which, by the way, is not a... Everyone associates that with Einstein, but it was only in the margin of some of his notes. He didn't actually see it as a main formula. It was just kind of on the side, like, oh, by the way, yeah. Just use it for working.
Yeah. Basically,
You...
it's something he derived out of his other equations, and he just was doing it for working, and then realized its importance later. But yeah, basically, most of the mass of an atom comes from its energy. Mass, energy. So that the discrepancies there then come with the God particle. What gives something like an electron? What gives the massless fundamental? But what gives gravity to massless fundamental particles? Because photons interact with gravitational fields, but they have no mass. So how does that work? So there needed to be a mechanism within quantum mechanics to explain that. Which there doesn't need to be in classical physics because space is bent. That's part of that. Quantum mechanics and general relativity don't fit well together. Some aspects do, but...
Although relativity isn't really classical.
Well, it's more classic. It's more classical than quantum mechanics. Although, I say that. Quantum mechanics came out within 10 to 15 years after GR was published, so...
Yeah, they were both pretty much the same time. And
they really were.
Arguments, they're kind of coming out simultaneously because they both took a while to develop.
All right. Well, we've got a question about the vax, anyway. I'm just skipping us on from continually going on the physics route because...
I get that. You're in control.
If the vax only lasts for 6 to 8 months, wouldn't it be logical to try and catch COVID during this time?
Not really, because the vax, there's a small percentage of people that it doesn't work for, and you can still get it and pass it on, particularly if you're looking at Delta strain, which you'll pass on with just as much viral load as if you hadn't had it. But when they say 6 to 8 months, that's the full effectiveness, and we're talking like 85 to 95% effective. Then within 6 to 8 months, it does drop, but it doesn't disappear. Or at least doesn't completely disappear. So I think that 6 to 8 months for, I think Pfizer, please correct me if I'm wrong, someone drops to about 60%. So there's still effect, it still helps. And remember, if you have a booster shot, which is much safer than getting the actual virus, that will bring you back up.
Yeah.
So, and with the booster shots, you can add in new variants. So I think you're much better off, much safer, particularly for the people around who cannot have the vaccine or are immunocompromised in some way, who are at bigger risk of just giving everyone a booster shot. That would be my answer from it. Matt
completely answer that because he's got a better chemistry background than me.
Oh, this is not chemistry, but it's getting closer to medicine, not by area. It is, but from my understanding, that's the case.
If you want to know more about that, I would say suggest you go and watch Dr. Ben. But
there's a couple of really good channels out there that do it.
Student Dr. Ben.
So there's that one. There's also
Mero, Nevada, or even Scientist Mel.
Yeah, Scientist Mel's had a few streams specifically on it as well, so they'll all have a better understanding than us. But...
Okay, so here's a good one. Also, as an EV, electric vehicle driver, I know lithium-ion batteries aren't the best solution, so what is?
Well, that's the problem. We don't really know what the best solution is, because energy storage chemically is not the most efficient way of doing things.
So here's the thing. Here's the thing with that. The reason why lithium-ion batteries are so good in terms of their energy density is because we're dealing with very light elements. And of course, the lighter the elements, the lighter the batteries, and you can get and you can pack more in because you're dealing with smaller particles, so you can therefore have greater energy densities for where you're at. The biggest energy density we can have is from hydrogen fuel cells, but of course there are risks attached to using hydrogen fuel cells because you're basically driving around in a bomb. Yeah. So it's
the other thing too is that because... Oh, sorry, I just want to add on there while you're talking about driving around with tanks of hydrogen.
Yeah.
Is the other problem there is that hydrogen, because it is such a small particle, is almost impossible to store in a container.
Yeah.
You can't... It's not easy. It will almost always leak out because we cannot physically make valves good enough that the hydrogen can't get through.
This is why spacecraft with hydrogen oxygen tanks are fueled up just before they're due to launch over the night whilst
yes, you don't want to leave them fueled up.
Because you can see the fuel leaking when they're on because it's not perfect. Yep, it's not perfect.
The one of the solutions to that problem, interestingly, I've heard some of the professors I've had as lecturers have actually kind of worked in this area, is instead of having a container, like a vessel that you try putting it in, you trap it in a network of molecules. So you basically build a giant cage-like structure. Normally you would do that with chemicals known as metal organic frameworks, so MOFs, which is basically we use a metal
this is going back to what you did in your video about
it.
The weird acronyms we get in science.
Kind of. I did cheat when in part of the video and did use a MOF to show one of my points when I wasn't 100% talking about MOFs, but it still works. So you basically use metals for your holding points, and then you build the cage structures with organics. And then what you do is you store the hydrogen in those cages. You basically and using either pressure or temperature or something, you can change and relax or tighten the cage.
Yeah.
So you can control how well the hydrogen is absorbed in it that way. So instead of holding on to it in a container, you hold on to it from a molecular point of view. That's, of the things I've heard, seems to be one of the better ones. It's also probably going to be very useful as for filters as well. And if you want to filter things like xenon from surgeries, because you can use it as a anesthetic or without it leaking, or you want to say sequester CO2, filter CO2 out of things, which is fairly important, or even store things like methane. They have potential there, but still somewhat early in those.
Now, another side to the thing about batteries: lithium ions are incredibly efficient at holding charges and things like that. They're also incredibly dangerous. Even with our more modern technologies, you still have lithium ions that catch fire and things like that. This is why they're looking at other options for battery cells. Some of them are relying on sodium instead of lithium. Now, whilst you end up with a heavier battery, you can get a similar energy density. So the same size battery can store a similar amount of charge. It'll just be a little bit heavier. But the advantage of it is it can't catch fire, because the sodium batteries don't catch fire. So you've got this thing that if you go to a sodium-based battery, you can reduce the dangers of the battery for the cost of a little bit of weight. So it's a balancing thing about how we do it. The other thing they're looking at, which is similar to what Matt was talking about, is using nanostructures to create to hold the electrolyte. And that actually will give greater energy densities within the batteries. So if you mix that with something like a sodium battery instead of going with a lithium ion, because also the other good thing about sodium is we've got a shit ton of sodium and not a lot of lithium. Lithium is really hard to get. We've got way more sodium on this planet than we do lithium. And so if we can move to a sodium battery and we can increase its efficiency by using nanotechnologies, etc., so that it's as good as the lithiums that we had. Yes, we can make the lithiums even better. But, if you've got a sodium battery that's doing what your current lithium-ion battery does, who cares? And it's safer, and it's going to end up cheaper because there's more sodium around. So, yeah. We should move on, though. I have, no idea what this question means. Oh, it's a joke. I can't believe I didn't realize that when I first read it.
And on that note,
on that note, you'll have to tell us later. Okay, Nerdy wants to know, why is friction a thing?
Entropy.
Yeah, pretty much.
It's actually a product. It can be derived from dealings with thermodynamics and entropy, because things and you actually have two different coefficients for friction for the same materials. One for when they're standing still, and one for when they're moving. So once an object that you're trying to hold in place by friction starts moving, you're gone. Unless you add extra friction somehow, extra surface area, you're not going to slow it down.
Yeah. All right. Sorry. I was going to move on so we can
I like that question
because we are so far
no,
behind.
that's fine. I actually like this question.
Go for it. You can read it and answer it.
So, nuclear submarines that have sunk, why aren't we containing them? Well, there's a couple of reasons for that. So if you're looking at ones like the USS Thresher, which is basically what happens when you don't pay enough attention to safety. The poor crew there suffered because basically there was a fault with one of the electrical generators, so they lost power partway through the dive, and then when they tried to come up, the ballast tanks had frozen, like the valves of the ballast tanks had frozen over, so they couldn't blow the water out of their tanks. But that one then got to what happens is when these things like that sink in deep water, they'll reach what is known as their crush depth and basically implode, and then they'll just shatter everywhere, because it's basically the physics of compressing that much air, and then when the shockwave comes back out, there's not really much left to contain. The other thing too is the ones that don't explode like that. Let's say they had a leak and so they flooded first, and so they went down and somehow sort of equalize the pressure. They're generally too deep for us to get to. Like, we're talking kilometers and kilometers
and
under
those that we can't get, that we
surface.
could conceivably have gotten to, mostly in what would be former Soviet Union, and have been there long enough now that there's not much point getting them out anymore. But it was a decision made at the time to leave them where they were.
Yes, because water is actually a really good shield against radiation. And the small amount of nuclear material in one of these submarines compared to the size of the ocean is not overly damaging if it somehow gets out. Most of it will be probably contained fairly close to the submarine unless there was a breach in the reactor. But yeah, they're either too impractical or not worth it. However, on that note, what has been a bigger worry to some scientists, or to some people, is the nuclear bombs that are contained on some of these submarines that have sunk. There was an amazing operation. It turned out to be a failure, but it was pretty cool, where during the Cold War, America had a set of hydrophones. I think they still do, set up in the Pacific Ocean.
Nuclear disasters, because it is terrifying, but it's also really interesting.
Yes, but it also shows how we've learnt from them and how we can try and make sure they don't occur. There was a Soviet submarine that, to the Soviets, completely disappeared. It was out on patrol, because remember, you can't send radio signals to submarines because radio waves don't penetrate through water very well, salt water very well. And this submarine disappeared. The Soviets had no idea, because remember, it's dived, it's gone on its mission, it's in the ocean. The area is too big to go looking for the remains. However, the Americans, because of their massive hydrophone network, heard the blast that sunk it. They reckon it was most likely one of the torpedoes failing, and either the fuel or the head detonated. Yeah, at least it would have been quick. But because their hydrophone network picked it up, they could triangulate based on when the sound wave reached all of their hydrophones. They could pick up where it was. So they waited for the Soviet Union to give up looking for it, because there was no way they were going to find it. It wasn't where the Soviets thought it was. And then they got who was the mental blank, one of the really famous rich
sorry,
no rich
October reference.
Yeah, they didn't get him. It was could have even been the Playboy guy, maybe. Like, it was just some really weird rich American to help finance the operation, where he was supposedly looking for ways to mine certain metals out of the ocean, but it was a CIA front that he was on board with, and they basically built a ship where the inside of it had a giant claw that could reach down to the bottom
Sounds
of
like
the
a Bond
ocean
movie.
and pick this. It is, but we know it happens. There's film of it too, and they got out to the sub, they found it, they picked it up, and one of the claws broke halfway up to it, so they ended up losing half the submarine. So they only got a portion of it back, and the portion they lost, I think, had the nuclear reactor. That was what. So they nearly stole a full Soviet submarine. Well, what was left of it. But there was another case where one sunk in shallow water, and when the Russians found it, the nuclear warheads were missing.
Ooh. Yeah.
So there's that.
I know
that
this is history and you love it, Matt, but...
I know. It's probably likely to be the Americans because they would be the only ones capable probably of pulling that off.
All right, so Ted's actually got a serious question for us, and I already know what my answer is. So a serious question for tonight is, what would happen if you fired a 50 kilovolt, 150 hertz, 250 amp electron beam at 5 grams of americanium 245 isotope? And my answer to that is I actually don't know.
I have no idea either. I'm not a nuclear physicist. I think Ted wins then because he stumped us.
Yeah, Ted wins that one.
I don't.
But we'll move on from that one. You can tell us later, Ted. Or we can have you. We're supposed to have you on one week. Maybe you can answer some of those questions for us. So Donna's asked, is it true that 3 meters of moon dust will block radiation? Yeah, probably.
3 meters of most materials will block.
Most materials, yeah. They've just got to be dense enough to hold the... To absorb the...
and it depends on what type of radiation too, because there's so many different types. So if we're thinking about the most dangerous ones, so like alpha beta decay. Alpha decay won't get through a piece of paper. It won't even get past the dead skin cells on you. So you're safe from it if you can hold an alpha emitter in your hand. Beta decay will get through that. It won't get through a lot. So like even a meter of moon dust would block pretty much all beta radiation. So getting that far ionizes too quickly. When you start moving into things like gamma radiation or even longer wavelengths, X-ray, etc., they can start to get through more. But the dangerous stuff, the wavelengths involved, the energies involved, most of them won't get through 3 meters of most dense materials, concrete, lead, etc. However, if you have something that doesn't interact,
like concrete when you actually make blocks out of it, so yeah, basically building a concrete block to stop.
Yeah, the other one, the stuff that will get through that much though, then has to be really good at not interacting. And if it doesn't interact with anything, then it's not going to interact with you, so it's not likely to be dangerous.
Yeah,
so neutrinos is a good example. We did the calculations in senior physics. Yeah, to have a 99% chance of blocking a neutrino, you do need a light year of lead.
Yeah.
It's just that unlikely to interact with anything, which makes them really hard to detect because you have to have a big detector and you're only going to detect the tiniest proportion of them. But we still have planned on detecting. We have built these detectors and we figured out exactly how many that we were meant to detect, and we were off, I think, by a factor of 3 because we didn't account for 3 different orientations or symmetries or something. Yeah. Again, this is getting into particle physics. It's not quite my area, but it was still pretty cool because once they took that into account, it was perfect.
That's the worst part.
Now the current sort of
brains kind of go. Yeah.
But also the modern detectors are that are kind of following the same lines, but for other particles are now being used to try and see if they can detect dark matter, or at least figure out what it might be. So it's pretty cool to look at. It's just not my area. I'll have to go ask some of my
Belinda apparently
friends.
asked a question earlier that I somehow managed to miss. So So my question was about the Twitter math thing. Question: under what circumstances wouldn't bomb dash apply? And if bomb dash should be applied, then what's the point of the discussion? Okay, the point about bomb dash...
I'll leave that one to you.
Okay. Now, I actually got in an argument with somebody over this on Twitter just for the hell of it, and I don't even know why I bothered, to be quite honest. The things about things like BOMDAS or BIMDAS, whatever you want to call it, is they are teaching tools used to teach kids in later primary school and in high school how to do maths. Now, there's a difference between learning how to do maths and learning math. This is one of the issues you get when you go from, oh, I did high school math and I did this. You learn techniques to do things and you learn systems on how to do it. When you get to higher education and you do your maths, you're actually learning why these things happen. And it's the same for science as well. You get into the whys instead of the hows. And when you get into the whys, you start realizing that multiplication is your multiple additions, and division. Division is addition
multiple
with fractions.
addition of negative groups, isn't it?
No. Division is additions of fractions. So you're dealing with fractions.
All maths is addition.
So pretty much everything comes down to addition when you're dealing with it in the long run. So and this is why things like that, why BOMDAS does matter. But in the scheme of things, when you're looking at it, you've also got to apply how that works. This is why when you do high-level maths, use brackets. Use your brackets all the time. Because if there can be any doubt about what you meant in your equation, somebody will misunderstand it. Because it's simple for somebody to put in there and go, oh yeah, according to the way I've visualized this, my answer's correct. And somebody else looks at it and goes, oh yeah, but I should do that bit that's outside the brackets before I apply the brackets. But somebody else will look at it and goes, the bracket should be factorized first, because that's also a very valid way to do maths. And so when it comes to those weird and whacked out questions, not so much the simple ones where people are just trying to look for gotchas, but when you're looking with the more complex ones where you end up with a multiplication outside of a brackets, and then people go, oh yeah, but you did the brackets first, but then we had this other multiplier before the bracket thing, and should we have done that first? Both can be correct, and that's the problem, because it depends on whether you do the factorization first, which my preference is that the factorization is part of the bracket. So if you've got a function outside the brackets, you should be applying that first and not what comes before that. But that's only because that's my preference for how to do it. It's not incorrect to do it the other way. Well, what you should be doing is putting all the brackets in so that people know exactly which way you meant for it to happen. So you learn to not be ambiguous. Yeah. When you do computer science, don't be ambiguous, because the computer will take it the wrong bloody way. So don't be ambiguous.
And you wonder why you're getting an error.
Make sure you put it there. Yeah, and you end up with an error, and you spend days and days looking for this stupid bit of code where you put your bracket in the wrong spot, or you missed a bracket, and C didn't care that you missed a bracket, because that can happen. Because some languages don't care, and you have to be really careful of this. So yeah, it's one of those things. But I've gone on my rant, and they'll do.
On that, maybe what's the next question?
Okay, Donald.
Okay, so this one here, I don't think it's just the star, but I guess how the star determines kind of what part of the spectrum we see. It kind of determines the light that's around us. So, of course, we kind of evolved to adapt to deal with that. Now, birds can see more color, but we got trichromatic vision. So we got 3 color receptors. Birds have 5.
Yeah.
So they have a better range of color. Now, part of this is also just evolution's kind of somewhat random, trial and error process, in that 3 colors is good enough. Birds, though, do rely on their sight a bit more than we do for how they operate, because they tend to be even more visual than we do for identifying things. So they ended up with kind of 5 receptors. But some of our primates were probably colorblind, particularly if you have nocturnal things. They do tend to be colorblind, so I wouldn't be surprised if some owls can't see color. Although on that note, we did find an owl that had caught a baby possum the other week. I went out for a walk late at night and we heard squealing. Oh, poor baby possum. Yeah, I wouldn't have cared if it was a rat or something that was like fully grown, but it was a little baby.
Yeah, basically,
little ringtail.
It's evolutionary. Basically, if there's an advantage to it, you get it. There wasn't a need for us to develop more than tricolor sight, so it never happened.
Yeah, basically. And they reckoned that some cephalopods, like squid, might be monochromatic. They might not actually be able to see in color, yet they can still detect color because of that. It's really, really weird, but they reckon that they actually tell color not by how it interacts with their eyes, so like where we physically see different colors, but based on how different wavelengths of light refract through their eyes.
So color is a production of our brain.
Yes.
Wavelengths don't necessarily have color. Our brain invented color as a way for us to perceive the wavelengths of light that we see. It's just a wavelength. There's not actually a color, which also begs the whole thing of we learn what a color is. You learn what blue is. We learn what green is. We learn what red is. But there is no way for us to know that the green that I see is the same green that Matt sees.
We can't at this stage do that. Also, another thing with birds is that they have in their head correction for refraction. Their brain does corrections for it because a lot of them hunt through, say, water, and they need to see through the water to find out where fish is, whereas humans have just, because we haven't needed to, we found either ways around it, or by the time we actually got to hunting fish.
Oddly
but birds
enough, though,
don't.
Technically, our eyes work better underwater than they do above it because they evolved underwater.
Yes, but we don't have the coatings that protect them.
No, we don't anymore. So. But technically, our eyes work better underwater than above it.
Unless that water has chlorine in it. You want blurry red eyes for a day.
Shall we move on to the next one?
Open them in chlorine. I just said one more thing. I was going with that. 2 more seconds. And because birds correct for refraction, that's why they don't see glass. They can't actually see it because their brain corrects for the difference. So that's unless you've got something physically on the glass. And I have seen it quite a lot with the birds that are around our house, particularly the kookaburras I feed, because the other birds, when they keep flapping at something and don't go anywhere, are smart enough to try a different route. Kookaburras just sit there going, why can't I move? And so we've had to pick a few up.
Will attack their reflections because they see the reflection but they can't detect the glass. So to them, it really is like having another bird.
Maybe that's why they like shiny things. No, I think that's different.
I think that's
not all birds
different.
like shiny things.
Yeah. Okay, so Ted's got another one. Okay, another kick to loins. Theoretically, time travel is possible. Why hasn't anyone done it yet? I think
it's more of. Yeah. I think the direction too. Yeah. And as I said, you can go forward, but from our understanding, going backwards is not as easy, and you have that symmetry problem. So it's quite possible that backwards travel isn't. And we're also assuming that by the time they invent it, we're interesting enough to visit.
There's also a theoretical posit here that any possible concepts that we have that could become time travels usually involve closed loops with rotating black holes or something like that. And because of the way you create the paths that could conceivably make an ability to travel back in time, you could only travel back to the point where the time machine was created. So for us to travel back, if we created a time machine that did let you travel backwards in time, you could only travel back to when you first turned on the machine. Yeah,
so, we don't have any way that would allow you to go back. Yeah, like back beyond now. Like we can't go back to see a dinosaur.
Yeah, even within our current understanding of physics, we don't know any way that that's possible. Yeah, unless there's a natural closed loop of spinning black holes somewhere that created one way, which I suppose the universe is pretty big. It's possible.
possible. The only way that we could kind of go back in time is to look up into space and see things that occurred a long time ago. That's the closest thing I've got to
Technically,
that. Which
technically,
means
if we
if you
could,
have a warp,
yeah, sorry,
I was just gonna say if you have a warp drive,
yeah,
so you can move from here to somewhere far out. Let's say we go 65 million light years away in pretty much an instant. You could turn around and with it'd have to be a massive ass lens, but you could do it with a giant lens, look back at Earth, and see the dinosaurs go extinct.
because you'd be probably struggling to find where Earth was.
Yes, and by a big lens, I'm talking a lens that would probably be bigger than a solar system. So, not impossible, but
Highly
certainly not
improbable.
practical. Yeah, I'll go with that. Oh. Okay.
Okay,
And,
we'll just laugh at Nerdy for a second, then we'll move on.
Oh, that was the NIF stuff.
Yeah. Where are we up to?
Doomsday or Ragnarok will just be Nerdy's shark lasers fighting my laser magpies. There we go.
Okay, the question wasn't to us. Alright, there's some great discussion going on in the chat. But they're not questions, so I'm going to skip through it.
That's alright, because I don't know how many more we can get to, unfortunately, before... We're getting close to 90 minutes. It's been a good session.
Yep.
It went much faster than I was expecting.
I've only got up to the thing where they're talking about how Australia could be on the top of the world.
I mean, you could, like...
Titan Uranus. The moon can't be upside down on the other side of the equator. The Earth would have to be a globe for that to happen. I love it.
That we can see the Southern Cross. And it always points in the same direction. Whereas if the Earth was flat, it can't always point outwards. You have to point different directions, depending on where you were.
Ted Franks asks, did you know you can use lasers to bend time? I think we actually covered that. That's how far behind I am in the chat.
Yes, I was aware of that in the sense that I know that because you've got the mass equivalence and mass bends time because gravity and relativity, yes, I'm kind of aware of it through that.
Back to batteries. So why aren't we making concentrated citrus-based batteries? We can grow that. I have
They're
a feeling
really inefficient.
We may end up genetically engineering certain plants or bacteria to produce an electrolyte for us that's more efficient. That is possible. There are some synthetics that we can create that actually might be more efficient than straight out. But I mean, sodium's almost as efficient as I think it's 2/3. It can hold about 2/3 of the amount of charge that are equivalent lithium ion. So you getting similar to energy densities, but you give up mass. It weighs more, obviously, but it's safer. So, and as we can get better technologies, especially with engineering the cells with nanotechnology, you can actually increase the energy density within it. So,
I got one thing on this really quickly that comes to mind. It's already been put into practice in some cases, particularly if you want a shorter-lived battery, but one that can still hold a lot of power. You don't make a battery in the sense that we think of. You use a supercapacitor. So basically 2 charge plates, and you build up just a giant amount of electrical charge and then slowly release it.
We will answer this. I actually accidentally scrolled through a bit fast, so if I've skipped something important, yeah, I'm sorry. So Belinda said, so the point of the discussion is to highlight that the brackets should always have been used because BOMDAS is basically a bullshit route. BOMDAS is not bullshit. It's a brilliant teaching tool. But when you do the higher levels of maths, you go, yeah, there are reasons why we do things in a certain fashion. And we can also, from that, see that there are certain circumstances where BOMDAS alone will not give you the correct answer because there's ambiguity in complex equations. So you get rid
basically
of the
brackets are not ambiguous.
Put the extra brackets in and make sure it's not ambiguous. Basically, is what I'm saying. Because if you give me an equation, if somebody has a particular bent for doing things in a certain order, and somebody else has it for doing another way in high level maths, they will not understand each other's equations. And that can just be a cultural thing as much as anything else, depending on where you did your mathematics degree. You know, what your lecturer liked or how they learnt. And this is the thing. BOMDAS is a rule that's used to make sure that in high school you have a good idea of the order of operations. And there technically is an order of operations. You need to do these things in this order or you will not get the correct answer. But when you're dealing with really complex equations, if you don't put the brackets in, somebody's not going to get what you would. Somebody's going to interpret it slightly differently to how you meant, and it does come down to a level of interpretation at that point. Now I missed something further up. There you go.
So why isn't gravity being taught as pushing down on mass instead of centrifugal force? In school, they tried to tell me that our Earth was spinning. It was spinning our source of gravity.
Well, that's
I'm not
wrong.
100% sure I quite get that. Yeah, I don't think that's quite how...
Gravity is...
The way I understand it from that level kind of point of view is you think of space-time as like a trampoline surface. It's like stretchy and can bounce a bit, and objects that have mass are like putting weights on it, and if you have a bigger mass it puts a bigger weight and it bends it further down, and objects will fall into these dips. That's the equivalent of us falling into the gravitational well that is our planet and was what's keeping us on this surface and stopping us from all floating off into space. Although maybe some people who don't believe in gravity, if they did float off into space, that would be a very good demonstration. But we're here because gravity works. So that was always my understanding. And centripetal force or centrifugal force were always taught to me as not necessarily real forces, in that they're not like, I can't go and measure like if I'm measuring the force of me trying to pull this lid apart, it's not in the same sense. To understand centripetal force or centrifugal force, you need to actually be in a rotating frame of reference where things get a bit more complicated, because in that rotating frame of reference, it's the force that's basically pushing objects off to the
centripetal
side.
Force on Earth. There is the spinning of the Earth actually pushes us away a small amount from the center of the Earth. But it's not compared enough. But it does actually reduce the amount of gravitational force that it acts on us, because those bits cancel out and the rest of the gravitational force is what we experience.
Which is why you weigh less near the equator.
Yep.
Because you're spinning faster.
Exactly.
However, to be at the equator and for the Earth to spin fast enough that you would actually start to float off it, because you basically end up in orbit, you need the Earth to rotate once every less than 90 minutes. Yeah. So it's which is just insane.
That probably wouldn't be very pleasant.
No.
Because I mean, at the moment, the Earth is rotating at the equation at about the rate of the movement of the outer surface, the outer circumference of the Earth at the equator is 1,000 kilometers or 1,000 miles an hour.
Miles
an hour, yeah.
Because all the flirfs use it.
Yeah, all the flirfs use it.
And they all use freedom minutes.
That sounds really fast, but I mean, it's not accelerating, so we don't. It's that whole thing of the.
It's the acceleration, so
it's not accelerating or decelerating. It's the same thing. In fact, we only experience a difference. And it's a pseudo effect. But as you move further or closer to the equator, you're actually changing the rate at which you're changing your velocity in those directions, so you actually do feel a pseudo form of acceleration.
And the other thing, because it's all about acceleration, it's what I said earlier with relativity, is that remember, if you're in a box and it's not accelerating, you can't tell you're moving without reference to an outside point. You shouldn't feel movement. Same thing.
Environment.
That's why what we feel is the acceleration due to gravity, because an accelerating frame of reference and one experiencing gravity are indistinguishable. So if I put you in a rocket ship and just set you here on Earth, or I put you in a rocket ship in deep space and accelerated you at 9.8 meters per second squared, you can't tell the difference without looking out the window. It's really trippy because the same things apply.
Yeah.
So all of the physics that applies in an accelerating rocket in deep space apply to gravity, which is why, because of gravity will bend light, because as it goes through, it's like the first particles come in and then you're getting faster compared to them, so it starts making it look like it bends. It's trippy. It gets really confusing quickly, but I like relativity. It's so cool to learn about, but it is not intuitive.
There's not a preferential frame of reference. Every frame is valid, which is why we know there's length contraction and there's time dilation, because there has to be, or you'd have to have a preferential frame of reference, and we know there isn't one.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. So, serious question from Doc. If it were possible to transplant someone's eyes into another person, would they see colours differently?
Probably not, would be my guess. It would be about how the brain interprets those electrical signals, and I think the chemicals and the nerve endings would have to be
your shades might look slightly
similar.
different, because if the nerve endings are actually... If the way the nerve endings respond is slightly different, the brain might slightly interpret them as slightly different shades. So it'd be like, it could be just like having a slight it could be the difference between wearing sunglasses and not. You might get a slightly darker or something like that because of the properties of the eye that got put in. But the colors that we see are an interpretation of the brain, not the eye. So no, you shouldn't see it differently.
Yeah.
However,
that's why
it is conceivable that somebody, and I'm not sure if this has ever happened, I'd have to look it up. It is conceivable that you could have a brain injury that changes the way your brain perceives color.
I'll have to go looking for that.
Yeah, I think we need to, because that would make an awesome discussion or a video. Has there been a case of that? Because that would actually be very interesting.
I have to go have a look.
All right, so Donald asks, so we can't make glasses for color refraction. Maybe we should make colored glass on buildings to save millions of birds' deaths. It's one of the reasons why we end up with, like, if you've got glass doors, they usually have a pattern on them. It's so that the birds can see the glass, and so you can see it too. Because I've been there when somebody's walked through a door, literally through the glass.
I've walked into them.
I've walked into them too,
before.
but I've never walked through. I know somebody who walked.
No, I haven't managed to. I haven't walked fast enough. I have hit walls at fast enough velocity that had it been glass, I would have been in a lot of trouble. But no, I've of my list of weird injuries, walking through a window is not one of them. So, enclosed window, that is.
I'm not sure if Ted was answering somebody or asking the question, but rods for night vision and cones for colors, right? Yeah.
I think that's true.
I think that's the right way around.
Well, as in, like, I think... Is it rods for, like, texture and then the color? Because you get black and white from one and then color from the other. I get shape from one.
So one picks up more of the intensity of the light in the other one. Only one of them is very effective for low lights, which is why, in low light you tend not to see.
It's also known as purple vision, because everything appears purple. I used to do that, because when I used to do cadets, they taught us stealth, and at nighttime, it doesn't really matter what you look like, it's the sound. That's what will give you away.
So Neddy said, what if the universe is a result of a previous time travel? Could be. I mean, our particular timeline could be the result of previous time travel if travel into the past is possible.
Maybe.
Yep, but we wouldn't know.
Oh, well.
because we're stuck in the timeline that we're in, unless, of course, we became the time traveler. So who knows?
But if we wouldn't know, then it almost becomes irrelevant. So as nice as a thought experiment it is, it's at least not going to affect us.
And even though this isn't a question, I love it. What do we want? Time travel. When do we want it? Doesn't matter. All right. Oh, there was a question. Oh no, that's within the chat itself. They're talking about Doctor Who. Okay, something about yellow mold.
I did actually see this one. I'm not sure. My guess, the answer to this one would be chemical signals. Because I know plants and fungi in particular are incredibly good at communicating through chemical signals to each other. Like, not just, fungus to itself and plants to themselves, but they can do it between each other too. So I like most things, it's probably chemical based. There'll be chemical signals that are released that trigger certain processes. Beyond that, it's a bit of a guess.
Now, Ted made a comment to Donald that maybe entanglement could explain brain links. Here's an interesting aspect to go with that. We are pretty sure that on some levels our brains act a little like quantum computers. That there is a form quantum reactions that happen within our brain that actually help with it, and it's an evolved process. So it was a way to make brains more efficient, along with having folds in them and all that to increase surface area. All those sort of things were part of the evolutionary product of our brain. So it is actually thought that there is levels of quantum activity within the brain that actually help with the functionality of our brains. So, but I mean, there's no solid evidence, but it's hypothesized that is the case.
We still don't know a lot about how brains work.
We don't even understand a lot about quantum computers, even though we're building them.
So when people talk about, my quick note for quantum computers is that when people talk about quantum computers, there's differences. So when you talk about a general quantum computer, is what most people would think of. If someone's talking about quantum computers, what the general public would think of is a general computer like the desktops we have. And yes, you can have some that are more powerful than others, but for the most part, they work the same. That's not the case in quantum computing. Yes, there is the goal to try and make a general quantum computer, but it's likely to be too difficult. So what they do currently is they make specific quantum computers that are designed to do very specific tasks. They're not generalized. They're not like just a general computer. They have very specific functions based on how they're made, and there's different ways to approach it. So that's my little thing. So when people say that, kind of like quantum supremacy, it really depends on what you're trying to do with it, because there are other things a regular computer will be able to do better than a quantum computer, and obviously vice versa. It depends what you're looking at.
Which is why we do both.
Yeah. You don't give up on one.
Yeah, just because you got the other. Belinda, yeah. My point is, when you start dealing with complex equations, not your really simple equations where you've got a bunch of addition and division and multiplication and everything in it. Yeah, generally speaking, BOMDAS will work perfectly fine as long as people remember that multiplication and division and addition and subtraction are actually simultaneous. It's not like division happens before multiplication or multiplication happens before division. They're simultaneous. Which most people don't realize because BOMDAS is just taught as is. Generally speaking, it'll give you the right answer. The problem is that when you're dealing with complicated maths, when you actually start bringing in brackets and indices and things like that, and you start doing logarithms, and you start throwing in complex irrational numbers like e or pi or something like that, and you end up with a really complicated equation, or you're doing factorials. You've got a factorial in the middle of an equation and everything. BOMDAS doesn't cover any of that. because it's designed for high school kids. And as soon as you start getting into things that are more complicated, as soon as you start doing any level of maths that's beyond what you've learned in high school, put your brackets in there, people. And don't try and confuse people who haven't done a more advanced maths by throwing up an equation that's got something a little bit more complicated in it and say, how would you get the right answer for this? And they go, oh, bomb-ass. And then you end up confusing them because the equation is deliberately written ambiguously so that two answers are both equally correct. It's not that bomb-ass is wrong. It's just it doesn't work when you get to... It does work. It's still... The basic premise of it is still correct. It's a bit like comparing Newtonian physics to general relativity. At the base level, it's accurate. It's just that the universe is a little bit more complicated than that. And this is the thing. Maths is more complicated than what BOMDAS can deal with. But for high school students, yeah, it'll do you right until you start doing calculus. Or high-level trig. Then you start getting into a few problems. But for most people, BOMDAS is perfectly fine. I hope that helped, Linda. But I might even do a video on this. So Donald asks, do different coloured eyes then change how we perceive colour? No, because the...
the colour part is not the part that's receiving the light.
No.
The colour is to do with melanin levels. Or is it I think it's still melanin. It's the same as the skin, isn't it? But basically all eye colours are on one spectrum. So as though we think there's different eye colours, there's basically a spectrum going from like kind of pale blue down to dark brown. And you could put all the eye colours in the middle based on concentrations of one chemical. So you end up with green being in between blue and brown. And you'll find, like people with me, you'll find actual traces of green, even though they've got brown eyes.
And you wouldn't get red eyes for similar reasons why you don't get green stars, because you'd be talking about subtractive colouring, so you wouldn't get reds. Reds would be part of the brown.
You do it with contact lenses.
Yeah, that's a bit different.
That's cheating.
Yeah, that is cheating. Okay, so we've got to... thanks for saying we're doing a great show. We're having a bit of fun, but we might wind up soon. But we might do this... Yep, there's no question.
Yes, because we have daylight saving tonight, so I lose an hour of sleep. So...
Yeah. So why are all Big Bang explanations diagrammatic from an outside looking in viewpoint? What is the expected experience from within it? All other physics are described from our point of view. I
think it's impossible to really show timelines from within them.
Yeah.
Like, for me, the equivalent comes to, well, it's like a timeline of World War One from within World War One. You can't really do it. You can't sit on, like, say, Vimy Ridge and then try and look from your assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand all the way to the final armistice, and then it doesn't work that way. I just think in the same way these are explanation tools, and it's just not easy to do. It's probably not impossible. I might be curious, but I think it's an explanation thing unless I'm missing something.
And generally speaking, like you see these diagrams, and they're generally put in high school reference books, or they're on a TV show where you're dumbing down the physics for the average person. I hate using that term, dumbing down, because I don't think we should necessarily have to dumb down everything. We are simplifying, and yeah, when it comes down to it, if you're actually studying general relativity, you're looking at the local effects of relativity, and then transposing that out to how it works for the entire universe. And then when you roll back time mathematically with general relativity, you get a better understanding of what we have at the beginning. And that's also why we know we can't get to the beginning of the universe. Our maths and our knowledge of science breaks down soon, even before you get right the way back to the Big Bang, because once you've got down to the temperatures and densities that you have in the early universe, physics as we know it goes out the window. And even quantum mechanics breaks down. So we need a more advanced understanding of both quantum mechanics and general relativity, something like the combined, like a unified theory, so that we can get back further. And even then, we may never be able to, because like at those temperatures and densities, it just doesn't make any sense anymore. Not to us, anyway. That doesn't mean it couldn't make sense. It might do. There might be an entirely new form of mathematics and a hypothesis within physics that gets us there, or gets a different species there, or whatever else. But we can't. Not with what we have now. We don't have the tools for it. But we've got a reasonable idea of what's required back then. There's a difference between having an idea of what's required to get from that starting point to get to where we are now, and actually knowing what it was. So, it's playing detective to a certain extent at that point. All the bits and pieces are there. We just haven't quite figured it out. Yeah. And what was that? Get it now. Bombas is always right, but it's an inadequate tool.
And we've caught up.
We have. So Ted says before he goes, we can ask him any questions on Twitter. He'll be watching, and we will drag you on one week, Ted, so we can have a good talk. And yes, we've caught up with the chat. I'm sorry if we missed any questions. I accidentally scrolled through a whole heap of them. If we did miss it, we will do another Q&A at some time in the future, and try to remember your questions and throw them at us at that point. We might actually, next time we do a Q&A, drag Ted on so he can answer some questions too, because some of the quantum mechanics stuff he's way better at it than we are. But yeah, again, thank you all in the chat for throwing those questions at us and giving us a lot of fun answering them. I know I really enjoyed it, and I even learnt a couple of things. I'm sure Matt enjoyed it. I don't know if he learnt anything. No, we did, because we had to look some stuff up, and we had to rely on Jake to give us a couple of answers in the chat. So, yeah.
And I always learn stuff from you, Jen, too. It goes both ways.
It does, but
I
mostly
don't know anything.
In my direction.
I'm not close to it.
I think
it depends on the topic.
It does, actually. It does.
Well, spectroscopy, maybe, but that's because I've already spent how many years studying it. But other areas, no. I learn just as much, I think.
Okay. Well, that's
always a balance.
There's a balance. There is a balance, which is why we enjoy working together. Because some of our skills complement. It's good. And we have a similar interest in other stuff. So it's good.
Yes, we just can't do biology.
Yeah. Yeah, but we are planning on having Dr. Ben on at some point. You'll be able to throw... Well, actually, that's what we should do for the next Q&A, get Dr. Ben on. So that we can answer the biology questions. But yeah, that will be a lot of fun. So keep an eye out. Next show, I'm not sure if it'll be on the week on the same time, because we are hoping that after Matt puts out his next show that we can get Kitty and Randolph and Tessa on with us to actually talk about Matt's video. Because
they all helped as well.
Yeah, they all helped as well, and it'd be a nice discussion that we can have and maybe field a few questions about the possibilities of alien life from the chat. So that should be a lot of fun. So keep an eye out on that coming up on Matt's channel on part 2. If you haven't seen part 1, go watch it. If you're not subscribed to Matt, why aren't you subscribed to Matt? If you're not subscribed to me, please hurry up and subscribe to me, because I like having more subscribers. It fills my ego.
Getting closer to 1,000.
Getting there. I'm getting there slowly. I actually lost a few in the last couple of days, but that's fine. That happens. YouTube does that up and down thing. But it's all good. It's all good. We have a lot of fun. But yeah, again, thank you to everybody there. Thank you, Matt. It's always so much fun. And yes, we will be starting the new channel sometime soon. It's just been one of those things where we've both had other stuff. and it hasn't got there yet, but we will still keep making the show up until that point, and then we'll be making it on its own channel. So along with some other stuff that Matt and I are both hoping to work on, so should be a lot of fun. One of those projects is we want to resurrect. I did a video back when I first started about the history of astronomy and rocketry, and I totally intended on making a part 2, and Matt and I are thinking of actually doing that at some point, but maybe after a long rest, after he's done this 2-parter, because it was so much work.
It's been a bit of work, but I still got to make part 2.
I know how stressed he's been with some of it.
Next week.
But we're all looking forward to seeing the second part. So again, thank you to everybody. Please like and subscribe to this video if you haven't done so already. If you want to help out, there is a Patreon, which I just realized people can't see that because I left the chat up. There is a Patreon. I'm not sure if I've got the link to the Patreon in the description, but it is, yeah, I'm not sure. I just realized that I put that up, and the Patreon link might not be in the description, because I think when I created the last one that I copied this.
No, it's there.
It is there. Okay. If you feel like helping in support, one of the things Matt and I did was we got hold of the software for doing all the planetary animations for Matt's video, and that came out of the Patreon, my Patreon. But yeah, and we want to spend some of the money that eventually comes in on being able to do more stuff and make stuff more interesting. So anyone who can help, that's awesome. You don't feel like you have to, though. We just like having you here. And yeah, so keep an eye out. We'll definitely be back on, probably not in our normal time slot, but because of the time for other people, but next weekend, and talking about Matt's video. Keep an eye out for Matt's video. Make sure you subscribe to Matt. Make sure you subscribe here if you're not already. If you want to catch up with me, I will be on Claire Bear's channel, and Claire's in the chat tomorrow doing, or later today if you're in the US, doing Midnight Mayhem. I don't know if Matt's going to be joining. Then I guess it depends on how busy Matt is.
I'll probably be working on the video, or also because remember I lose sleep too with the. Oh yeah, you lose sleep with the thing. Because we lose an hour tonight. We'll see. I'll probably be there in the background though. But yeah. So, check that out if you want to throw your link in the description. Claire, go for it. Hey, is Claire not opt on my channel? She is not. How did that happen? You are now, Claire. There we go. If you want to shove the link in for tomorrow's show, Claire, feel free. Other than that, we will catch you all later, and Matt, if you want to tag us out. Yes. Until next time, people, stay like protons and be positive. Bye.